Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this Chem webinar, Unlock Potential with Cambridge Primary Insight. My name is Caroline Greener. I'm the International Marketing Manager at Chem, and we'll start off just with some housekeeping. Please note that your microphones are all muted. We cannot hear any members of the audience, and this is to ensure good sound quality. If you would like to ask questions, please post them in the questions section located on the right-hand side of your screen. We may answer as we go through the webinar if it seems appropriate, and if not, we'll just answer questions at the end. You will receive a certificate of attendance sent to your email inbox 1 hour after the webinar finishes, and we'll send you a copy of the webinar recording and the slides in the next day or two. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Mark Fraser, who will be hosting us this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Caroline, and welcome along, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And just a very quick few words about myself before we start. I'm the Teaching and Learning Lead at Cambridge Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring, and I've worked for Chem since about 2015. And prior to that, I was a primary head teacher and teacher across 3 schools in the northeast England for about 18 years, and developed a real interest in educational assessment, particularly for children in the primary phase. And I've had an involvement with INCAS. Those of you who've used Chem before might know about that. You might be existing customers, and got involved in the Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring on the basis of being a trial school to use it. So I've got a real sort of vested interest in INCAS and its new variant, the evolution of INCAS into Cambridge Primary Insight, which we're going to be talking about today. So if you don't know about Chem, we've been around for 40 years now, and we were in the University of Durham for the majority of that. And we've worked in over 100 countries, and we're known for our evidence-based approach to formative assessments. In the early days, it was all paper-based systems, and then in the most recent years, we've sort of moved away to computer-based systems. And we've worked with schools, ministries, and associations around the world. So as mentioned, we used to be part of Durham, but in 2019, we joined the University of Cambridge. And our kind of mission is to help teachers to turn data into knowledge. We bridge the gap between research and practice. We provide evidence to support good decision-making, and that's what really I want to focus on today, using evidence. That's what Cambridge Primary Insight allows you to do, gather and interpret and apply information about how effective your students are doing, how well they're doing across a range of key skills. So we occupy with INCAS at the moment and Insight shortly, this primary phase, this age group between 5 and 11. So again, some of the references I use today, it's primarily UK centric in terms of age groups, but the good thing about Insight is it's age based and not necessarily dependent on what your kind of version of grades and years or sets or standards, all of the different terms that are used around the world. We use really the primary measurement in Insight is age equivalent scores, which I'll talk about in a little while. So if you know Chem, as you might know, we have a variety of different systems, and Primary Insight is a system which, as you can see there, focuses on key areas of learning. So we've got reading and spelling, mathematics, arithmetic, and developed ability, which I'll explain a little bit more about in a while. So it's a modular system. Again, as you can see at the bottom, it takes about 20 minutes for each module, and I'll tell you more about the assessment as we go. But in short, we're going to look at these sort of 5 key sort of areas. We're going to talk about what's new about about Cambridge Primary Insight, how it's evolved from INCAS, the benefits of using Insight. We'll look at some example questions and some example reports, show you what the new reports look like, and then think right at the end about what can you do to help improve learning outcomes in your setting by using Insight. It would be interesting if you can drop into the chat, just the fact that you are an existing Chem customer, or you're brand new, you've never heard of us before. Maybe if you're using other types of computer-based assessments, drop that in. Caroline's sitting alongside here. She's going to keep an eye on the chat. And if we spot any questions that seem relevant at the time, we'll stop and we'll answer those. Otherwise, any questions that you have, do drop them in the chat, or save them up till the end, and we'll drop them. We'll answer as many as we can, and if we can't, we will drop you a message, answering your question later on. So, first of all, then, what is new? Well, INCUS has been around. It's a much-loved system. It's been around for about 20 years, and it's been used by learners around the world. An enormous amount of investment's gone into improving the assessment experience in the last year or two of Chem's history, and we're right on the brink of launching this for the new school year in the autumn. And if you know the system, you might see some similarities with INCUS, because we're trying to keep continuity. If you're an existing INCUS customer, you will be able to kind of port across onto this new system. However, there are also lots of changes behind the scenes that have been implemented in the sort of the recent past to make the administrative and the technical performance of the new system even better. Again, a lot of these changes have been made following customer feedback. So we're striking a balance between creating new things but maintaining a lot of the popular functionality that kept customers using INCUS for so long. So we've got new things like in the reporting section when I get to where we've got a parent report. We've never had that before, but again, direct response to customer request. We've also got new teacher guidance. So we've got individual and group reports where we're evolving this even as we speak. So what is launched at the start of the next school year will continue to evolve in the years ahead. And we've reviewed a lot of the content, and we've made it far more appropriate for children for whom English is an additional language. So just simplifying a lot of the questions. Colleagues in Cambridge have reviewed these, and we've tried to just make this as universally accessible as possible. And I would like to point out that, if you are, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, if you have been using INCUS for years, you will not lose your data. So you can just keep going. When eventually we have the new system up and running, you'll be able to port the data across. Caroline, have you anything? There's something popped up in the questions already. Caroline's waving.
Yes, Andy Parker Bruce is asking, when do the changes begin? So that kind of goes back to what you were saying about porting people across. So the new Insight assessment is going to be ready for first use in September 23 for new customers. And what we'll be doing is porting across existing INCAS customers during the academic year. So you don't have to do anything. You'll be moved across to the new system as soon as we can practically do it without losing any of your historical data. So hopefully that answers your question, Andy.
Thanks, Caroline. That's great. So moving on, what are the benefits of using a system like Insight? Well, it's an adaptive system, so that's a unique experience for your students. Talk a little bit more about the adaptivity, but basically it's a system, a computer-based system that selects questions directly tailored to each individual student's ability. So you could have two students sitting side by side, roughly the same ages, but depending on their responses, they would have a very different route through the assessment, very different experience. It saves time as well. There's no paperwork or marking required. And you as a teacher just need to kind of supervise your students. I'm a former user of the INCUS system, and we used to do this in the good old-fashioned kind of computer suite to start with, and then as the years went by, we had laptop trolleys and things like that. So we would set up groups, a whole class sessions, and just work through the modules, because like it says in the next box there, it's flexible. So you can do all of the Insight sessions, modules in one block, or you can break it up into a series of sessions. I think thinking back to when I was in school, we used to do maybe 1 week we would do the literacy, next week we would do the maths, week after we would do the developed ability, mainly just hinging around our sort of time that we had in the ICT suite. And it's fun. It's still presented in a kind of cartoony sort of storybook way. So, you know, students, young students particularly really like this. It's fun and interactive. It's student-led in terms of students work through at their own pace. So they would typically sit with a set of headphones on. A lot of the guidance is provided, you know, as audio instructions, so the students can just listen. If they don't get the instruction the first time, they can repeat it, and they can just move through at their own pace. When all the modules are completed, you get your reports. Well, you don't have to complete all the modules, but if you want to see the full range of reports, obviously you need to complete the modules, and then you will have instant feedback at your fingertips. We hope this is actionable insight. That's, you know, that's information that you can use and you can act on. We hope this will really improve your teaching. And of course, doing this once is good enough, but if you do it, you know, over time, then you see change over time, and you can measure, you know, student progress and see roughly who's in line with expectation, who's doing, you know, really well, who needs that additional support. It's a really useful way of profiling your classes and your year groups quickly. So in short, you know, Cambridge Primary Insight will provide you with a comprehensive and objective overview of what your students know and can do in key areas of literacy, maths, and reasoning. So I did mention a minute or two ago there the phrase adaptive assessment. So let's just have a think about what that is. It's a computer-based system which presents questions according to the responses that are given. So if correct responses are provided, the questions will gradually increase in difficulty. So typically, a student is provided with a question that is suitable for their age. So we know the age of the student. So the youngest users will get very, very simple questions. The older users will come in kind of higher up that ladder, if you like. So they will see a question that is roughly, you know, what we would think a child of their age should have a good chance of answering. If they get that correct, a slightly different question, slightly more difficult, will follow. If they don't answer correctly, an easier one will appear. And so this goes on until we reach a level where we can estimate the student's performance. Again, because it is doing this, every student will see a different set of questions according to their age and their performance. By doing this, we think, you know, the students remain better engaged and motivated, and as a consequence, we quickly can reach a measure of their ability. It's broken up into modules here, so you can see we've got reading, spelling, general maths, arithmetic, and developed ability. Again, some of these modules take, you know, the reading one, typically 20 to 25 minutes, a little bit longer. Some of the other modules like mental arithmetic, short, snappy sections. And again, if a student isn't doing particularly well in the sort of the first module, they might not actually progress to the more tricky material. So you can see when we've got gaps on some of the example reports where this has happened, I'll explain that's why they might not see the full range of questions. We want to keep children and students sort of motivated, so we don't want to dispirit them, you know, by presenting content that's too difficult. So, you know, unique, tailored experience that keeps students working and motivated. So let's see some of the example questions. You've got, oh, there is a question. Again, Caroline's.
Yes, Mark. So Jane Goldsack's asking, I just thought it would be a good moment to ask this question. Can the assessment be split to be months apart, as we are thinking of using 2 of the modules as entrance baselines?
Well, yes, it can. And we will show you some of the reports in a little while and how we kind of record that information. So yeah, you can use it, as I say, in one session, back to back, or children can become a bit sort of test fatigued by doing things like that, but absolutely you can spread that out over a period of time. So a couple of examples coming up. I'm showing you some really easy ones to start with. These are typically kind of the ground floor entrance level for the younger learners. So in reading, we have word recognition, word decoding, and comprehension. And sometimes the instructions are given, through audio, as I mentioned. So you will have, like for this first example, the narrator will say, dog, dog, and then the student clicks on, the correct sort of word. So you can see top right-hand side there in that top box, click dog. So you would have, the answers then sort of are shown like that. You get the correct answer. This is the next example question. More kind of pseudo words perhaps sometimes pop up as well. So we've got phonics in there as well. So you can see highlighted in yellow, you'd have heard the word DAP. The students clicked DAP, and then you can unclick, if you give the wrong answer and try again. And the mode of response changes slightly. So many of them are like this in kind of multi-choice format. But other times with things like the comprehension, again, if you're a user of Incus, you will recognize this Hunter-Grunden format, which is developed by an academic, Elizabeth Hunter-Grunden, and it's not just a test of reading, but it's a kind of test of understanding, in the sense that the correct word, it's a bit like a closed procedure. You've got to choose the correct word to drop into the space, and this is sort of multi-choice, but you can see as I was walking home, click on home, from my friend's house last Thursday evening, so click last, and so on. And the student sort of works through and sort of completes the passage. So we're looking not just for the ability to correctly read the word, decode the word, but understand what that means and choose to drop it into the gap there. Again, they become increasingly difficult. So showing you some quite easy ones here. So all my examples today are quite easy, just showing you what it starts off at, but it does become pretty challenging indeed. So with age equivalence way up into the kind of 16-year ability sort of range, which is sort of way beyond what we would normally expect primary students to be attaining. So maths, we've got 4 maths modules. We've got 2 number sections, measure, shape and space, and data handling. So mental arithmetic is classed as a separate module at this point. And again, just really simple questions to start with. Here are 3 bikes. So there's the audio instructions. You hear the narrator read this out, and the child does not have to read this. This is not a reading test. This is a maths test. So you can see question, if you put 1 more bike in the picture, how many would there be? So I can count 3 bikes. I'm fairly sure 1 more would be 4. So I'd click on 4. Move on, see something a little bit more challenging. From the measure shapes and space section here, you can see there are sometimes problems like this. This is a little bit of kind of logic and almost sort of sorting going on here. So which numbers in the square and the circle, but it's not in the triangle. So again, it's just nice little activities like this that just gets the students thinking. Moving on, we have developed ability. Now, developed ability, if you've not heard that phrase before, is a really useful concept. One of our kind of founders of Chem years ago, Professor Peter Timms, was a big believer in this because it's a really useful indicator of a student's capacity to learn and acquire new skills. And we measure it in 2 main ways. Using vocabulary. Again, Peter Timms was a great sort of believer in the fact that a student with a really sort of well-developed, well-rounded vocabulary was far more likely to succeed further down the line in their sort of academic and work, and also in real life in the workplace itself. So we start off with really basic things like questions like this with a picture vocab. So you've got the word edible. So you hear the word edible, and looking at that, there's only one of those 5 things there that I think I could eat. So I think I could probably eat the apple, top left there, so I'd be clicking on the apple. And then the other strand we measure is non-verbal ability, where we have shape problems. So you see things like this, so that you get an array of dots, and then a second array appears, and the task is to find that first pattern hidden in the more crowded second pattern there, kind of thing. So you would click on the individual dots to shade them in. So I'd be looking to see if I can see how this pattern on the left, the blue dots, would translate across onto the right-hand side. And I just click the next button, you can see there it's hidden. So you'd be hoping that the students are going to click on these buttons here to reveal that pattern. Again, it's one of those things that I quite like doing these, and they're quite fun and engaging and language independent. So this also gives us a really good sort of clue as to, if a student's doing particularly well at developed ability, but not so well in maths or the literacy sections, perhaps this is just a clue that, they've got this ability, but language is perhaps holding them back. So it's a really useful screener for children who've come to school and they are English as an additional language speakers, so it's pretty useful. Again, very popular, been around for years. We did not want to take that out. We'll be updating things as we go, but it's a really sort of useful measure for teachers. And tried and tested systems as well. The spelling, we hear the words, the students then click on, if you hear the word bicycle, they would click the keys, B-I-C-C-C-Y, oh, I've misspelled it, right, I can undo it, just take it off. You can, go back, spell it correctly, have a think about it, listen to it again if they need to. Really useful, really flexible. And then we've got the arithmetic section, which again is just very, very simple, the 4 operations kind of material, starting off with really simple things, working up to far more sort of complicated and challenging things. So we would typically work through, we present things generally in the order of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and then the children will kind of climb the ladder, working through the various levels of difficulty. And then once you've done the assessment, what do the reports look like? The new reporting is a major development and a big step away from the Incas spreadsheets, which were essentially Microsoft Excel based. You will still be able to get your data extract, because we know a lot of schools like to take the data out, import it into their own systems. You might have tracking systems or management information systems. You'll still be able to extract the data, but our new reports are far more sort of engaging and nicer to use. So we've got the age equivalent scores, which has been the sort of the mainstay of the scoring system within Incas. We've focused in a little bit more on highlighting the age differences, and we have improved individual pupil attainment profiles, the individual student report, which you'll see in a little while. We still have the standardized scores, or our take on the standardized scores, which are age standardized. We do age standardized things just because in some assessments that Chem provides, we have testing windows. You do it in early in the autumn term, for example. With Insight, like with Incas, you can do them any time of year. And to make a fair comparison of your learners with other learners who've done this, against the sort of the benchmarks, we make adjustments for the student's age. We have a cohort profile report, which is the old box and whisker plots with a refresh. And we have pupil progress reports, a longitudinal chart, which you can see as the data builds up year on year, how your students are making progress. So let's have a look at, firstly, the filters. So again, these filters were quite clunky in the past, even though, if I say so myself, as a former user, it was a little bit complicated. So we've simplified those right down. So this just allows you to choose the areas that you want to focus on so that you can zoom into the data that you want to see. So you can do that, by your academic years, your year groups, your classes, but also by the overall modules or by the individual sections. And you will see age equivalent scores. Now, I apologize for the size of the text here. It is quite small, but when you get the slides, you'll be able to sort of zoom in and look at this at your leisure. But after completing the Insight modules, students are awarded 2 types of score. First of all is the age equivalent scores. Now, if you don't know what they are, if you haven't come across them before, we look at the difficulty of our questions and we know roughly how old a student is when they are sort of attempting this. And you can see that's, I say roughly because we've got, as you can see, an age range. And this ties into the earlier question about whether this can be done in one sitting or whether this can be spread out. So you can see Abby here, she was 9.3. So that's basically 9 years and 3 months. Sorry, it's not a point, it's a colon, it's not a decimal. There's 12 months there. So we've got, she was 9 years and 3 months old when she started, and she was actually 9 years and 4 months. So this has been spread out over about 4 months. And, if Abby is right on track, she would be looking to be getting a score of about 9 and 3 months as an age equivalence. But you can see in maths, general maths there, her score is actually 9 years and 0 months. So that is a difference, which is a little bit below where we would expect to see her. So she's about 3 months below. Again, not a massive difference. And always we say with chem things, this is just one tool in the toolkit. This is not an absolute measure. This is just a really good sort of indicator across the board of how your students are doing. And you can see other students on this, this example table. You've got like Ben on the next row down. He was 9 years and 2 months old when he did the general maths. He's come out with a score of 9.8. So that's, a difference of, I beg your pardon, he was 9.3 and he's got, a difference of 5 months there. You can see Naya below is doing extremely well and is about a year ahead of where they ought to be. So you can see these scores for all of the modules. So they're listed there. So you've got general maths, mental arithmetic, reading, spelling, and developed ability. So the actual score, and then followed in brackets by the difference between the child's chronological age and their age equivalent score. So you can see, this takes a little bit of tuning into perhaps when you first see it, but this is kind of statistics for the non-statistical. And again, this is a really sort of, tried and tested method. Our customers have liked using this, so we're very happy to keep providing these scores. We also have age standardized scores. Now, again, these are a little bit more statistically involved, but you can see we have a system which is based on a child who is in line with expectation. They will have a score of 100. So that's their kind of, the typical score for a child of that age would be 100. And we have, for the those stats enthusiasts out there, a standard deviation of 15. That means the bulk of the class, the bulk of our cohort doing INCAS fall in the gap between 85 and 115. So that's roughly where students should be. Now, we've got some color coding on this report, which doesn't, isn't governed by that standard deviation. This, if you're a user of INCAS in the past, you'll remember the error bars, the sort of the bars that show sort of the rough variation in scores, what we'd expect to see. And it varies from module to module, but basically if a child's doing really well, we'll be highlighting them in green. If they're doing not quite so well, we'll put a bit of pink shading on there and they get the sort of the red triangle. And again, this isn't diagnostic in any way, but this is just drawing your eyes to potential issues. It might be the case that this is just a cue for conversation. You might just want to chat to the student about this, and just if they've got a particularly low score, just ask them, how did you find this section? Was it all right? Did you understand what you needed to do? Were you distracted in some way? And again, you just need to make allowances Worst case scenario, you can run the module again and it will overwrite the scores. So at the minute, we just have one assessment sort of window each year generally, but again, if you need to rerun the assessment, you can do, and it will just overwrite the students' scores. We're working towards multiple assessment windows at the minute, but at the minute we're sticking with the INCAS tried and tested method. So also we have individual reports where you can see, just zooming into the table section, for every module and every section, a student gets this spread of information here. So you can see what their age was when they took the assessment, what their age equivalent score was, and what their age difference was. This student hasn't done particularly well in the mental arithmetic, so they didn't progress beyond the addition section. So they were really struggling with that. They were 2 years and 4 months below where we thought they might be. So they haven't sort of progressed to the other sections. So I know in the later release in May, we're going to have a little asterisk in here just explaining that why there's a gap. Also on that report, we have an age equivalence chart. Again, just takes a little bit of tuning into, but basically this shows age equivalence scores marked by the black dots. They're shown in relation to the student's actual age, which is that grey line there. So that's the age of the student. So you can see this student has performed a little bit below in general maths, is quite well down there in the mental arithmetic. It's done rather well in reading and is above, and has had not a great experience in developed ability. So again, this might just be something that you think, yeah, that sort of stacks up. That's what I was expecting for that student, or it might be a surprise. And again, just need to talk it through and find out what they experienced. Do you need to run this again, or is that would you consider that to be a true reflection? And again, this is triangulating all of the information all the things that you observe in the classroom, the book work that the child produces, what your colleagues have told you, if they are new to your class, all those kinds of things. And the other point of reference is the red dotted line across the middle of the table there, which just shows you the kind of the midpoint. That's the sort of the age range for your particular class here. And we would expect, the children to be kind of clustered somewhere around that. So the old box and whisker plots have been given a refresh for the year group overview. So if you've come across these before, you will know what they indicate. If you haven't, I'll just explain quite quickly that this just shows you the spread of scores. So we've got the year 1, year 2, year 3, and so on going up. The green diagonal line, that's just showing age-related expectation. So your typical 7-year-old, for example, will have a score of 7 years and 0 months. Your 8-year-old will be 8 years and 0 months, and so on, edging up until they're beyond 11 there. The blue box, the vertical height of the blue box, represents the middle 50% of your students. So that's the interquartile range. The black line across that box represents where the midpoint score was. So you'd expect that to be intersecting the green dotted line. That's giving you a clue that on average your students are performing in line with expectation. But you can see the spread, and vertically you see the spread in terms of their ability, and left to right, you see the spread according to their age. Now, this is just made up data here, but you can see in some classes it's nicely truncated, like between year 3 and 4 in the example here, you've got a nice clear-cut sort of boundary. However, just to show you that there is a bit of functionality here, in year 4, for some reason, we've got a lot of older children who perhaps ordinarily would be in year 5, but for some reason they're not. So this maybe just explains unusual sort of results that are plotted in tables like this. You might have had a group of children who haven't been able to move on for some particular reason and have been kept back. And also the other subtle sort of indication here is the left to right placement of the whisker, which shows the extreme scores. So you've got the bulk of the students in the middle, and the representation of how far above and below the sort of the midpoint these scores extend. the left to right horizontal positioning shows you whether you've got sort of relatively young children or relatively old children. So if the whisker is off to one side, you've got quite a young cohort if it's towards the left. However, if the whisker's out towards the right, you've got, you know, a lot of autumn-born children. If it's in the middle, you've got quite a nice spread of ages across the year group. So again, lots and lots of information. If you've got extreme sort of low or high scores, they're marked with an X, and really sort of extreme outliers are a circle. Can't see any on here, but you can see it on the key. Oh, I've got a question.
Yes, I've got a question here from Jessica Evans, who asked, is there a cap as to how highly a student can perform? For example, if a child in year 6 has an age equivalent score higher than age 15 or 16, can that be shown in the results?
It's generally truncated. So on the tables, you will see basically that's represented as 16 and 0. So I mean, it's unusual. We don't see much of that. We do see it sometimes. We've got some children who are, you know, extremely able, but to be fair, this is a, you know, primary assessment, so we're only measuring up to, you know, on the, you know, the vast majority of students are attaining in line with sort of age-related expectation, but we do see some real sort of bright sparks who do, particularly in things like reading, can, you know, have a very, you know, quite unusually high age equivalent score. But again, just thinking back to my time in the classroom, having, you know, a student with an age equivalent score of 16 doesn't necessarily mean they are behaving like your typical 16-year-old. Is just a represented, you know, it's just representation of the fact that they've done very, very well here. And again, you make your inferences around that. You know, if you've got a child who is really sort of hitting the ceiling here almost, well, that's just a clue that they're, I suppose, you know, in real need of being challenged and stretched even further. And, you know, by doing that, you know, it's you know, vital that their kind of motivation's maintained, and, you know, you can kind of push this student on as far as possible. But that is the sort of the numerical, you know, cap, if you like, 16. Okay, so next report is, again, just you can see time's getting on, so just going to pick up the pace a little bit. We have a report for parents and guardians or carers, and you can have this. Some schools use this in the base assessment. Some schools like using this, some schools prefer not to, but again, it's there. Again, we've produced this because schools have been asking us, do we have anything for parents? Not just to explain the scores, but just to explain what the assessment's about. So the bulk of the report, again, it's tiny text. You won't be able to read it, but you can see it's designed, you know, that's split up into sections. So you have a little explanation of what the student did in each part of the insight assessment. And there's a little bit of guidance right at the end about kind of, you know, just what next steps might be, but also we have just sort of represented the score in a kind of schematic way. So we're progressing left to right across these colored bars for each of the different modules. The blue box in the middle represents the typical range where students will fall into on the whole. As I say, that's kind of, for the statsy folk out there, that's a standard deviation and above and below the average. So that's a score, standardized score, age standardized score between 85 and 115. That's how that's calculated. But really, you know, the power is that you're looking here and you're seeing that Abby is doing particularly well in 3 of the modules, but for some reason she hasn't done quite so well in the developed ability. So maybe her problem-solving skills just need to be kind of revisited, and just have a chat with Abby about why, you know, she was finding some of the questions tricky. And again, what can she do to sort of sharpen up those you know, kind of problem solving and sort of logic skills that we're measuring in that section. But again, really simple, deliberately devoid of stats, just because we just want this to be universally accepted by as wide an audience as possible. So hopefully that's something that schools will like to use, even just to use as a kind of the basis for a conversation at a parents' evening. Really nice idea to do that. And I think a very non kind of statsy way of approaching it. And then finally, We've got some, longitudinal reports which show, again, this has to, this can only appear once you've done this a few times, once you've done insight on multiple occasions. The more you do it, the more information that's there. But it just maps a student's journey through. That's the kind of the red line. So their scores marked with the black dots, red line connecting them. And as benchmarks around that, you've got the year group average for your particular setting. And then the score, the equal to age line, that's basically where students typically are for their age. So you can see that the class and the individual student in this case start just below sort of age-related expectation, and they make some improvement as they go along, and by the time they get to year 5, they're just sitting just nicely above. So it's a really positive story there. So you can see something interesting happened between year 2 and 3. Perhaps that's just the transition from key stage 1 to key stage 2, where sometimes it can be a big step for some children, and maybe they just have, if you've done this early on in year 3, maybe the children are still adjusting. That might account for that little bit of a plateau there, but you can see they recover quite nicely after that. And then, just to round off, really, just want to think about how using insight can help you to improve your learning outcomes. So we've got this nice model, because insight provides what we like to think of as actionable information. That's information that allows you to identify issues, make improvements, and raise standards. By following a system like this, perhaps, where you assess the children, you use insight or your other assessments that you have in school, and you can do this any time of year with insight. And basically, that's your data capturing process. So you do the assessment, the data is gathered, and then you need to look at it. You need to analyze it, think about it, identify trends. Can you see patterns for individuals or groups? Can you pinpoint gaps in learning? Can you see whether your students are roughly in line with where they should be according to age equivalent scores? All of these things that you can look for. Once you've done that, obviously you want to plan, what can I do? This is now the so what side of things. I've found this out, what can I do about it? And you can focus and tailor your teaching around this. This is about raising expectations, setting realistic yet challenging targets, and heading trouble off at the pass kind of thing. You're planning early interventions. So you plan your interventions, and of course you carry those plans out. You teach your students, and you use the data alongside your professional judgment. This isn't a panacea. This is one tool in the toolkit. You need to be looking at what your students are doing and thinking about triangulating your data that you see in the classroom on a daily basis with what goes on in books to historically what you know about the students. So basically, you can target your resources effectively. And at the end of the cycle, reflect on what you've seen, what you've done. Look at the student outcomes. Can you see progress taking place? If not, maybe it's time to think again. If you can see progress taking place, great. Keep on doing what you're doing. Something's working. But basically, that's allowing you to measure the impact of your teaching. And of course, it's not just about students at the bottom of this cone. We're going to provide you with some really useful insight at a student level, but that's aggregated up to a class level, and also to school and year group level. If you are a multi-form entry school, you can see how classes are doing in relation to each other. Do we need to be thinking about sort of mixing our classes around next year for whatever reason? And then the benchmarks just give you that kind of common sense check, because I think sometimes if you're working in a small school, you haven't got too much to do with other schools around about. You need that sort of benchmark about what's going on in the outside world. So we've got some really nice resources that you can see on our website. And then just something from sort of the outside world that I really quite like. If you've not seen the Education Endowment Foundation's website, the EEF, please have a look. We're not connected with them in any way, but I just really like this personally, and I think it's a really useful place to go and have a look to see what's out there in terms of strategies and interventions and systems of support. There is evidence-based evaluation of these things. some really nice guidance reports and some very easy to understand posters and flow charts as well. So if you've got, I don't know, an issue with mental arithmetic in year 3, what can I do about it? Have a look on there. There's some really good ideas. So the end game here is about using the information you've gathered to choose the right strategies to use to accelerate the progress that your learners make. And finally, I'd just like to say, that Cambridge Primary Insight provides just that very thing, insight. It's insight into what your students know and can do in the key areas of learning. So it's convenient and it's objective, and we'd be delighted if we could provide you with some actionable information to unlock your students' full potential. So that's all from me. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you found it useful and informative. And if there are any more questions, Caroline will hopefully come online and have a look.
If we can answer them now, we'll do
our very best.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, there are a couple of questions. The Macclesfield asks, you said pupils can keep working through the various assessments. Does this mean that they only have to log in once and only enter one key code rather than having lots of different key codes?
The login system is changing. Again, that's being simplified. Yeah, that is something that I have experienced, and I feel your pain. Done that with, helping out with classes of year 2 children who can't remember their passwords. So yeah, that's been changed. But yes, you can do it, as I mentioned before, in one session, in one sitting. I probably would choose not to do that. I think it's good to spread it out a little bit over a matter of days or even a week or two. Remember, the reports give you that sort of summary of the child's age at the start and at the end of the process as well. So again, you can just infer, if it's a short window, then you would not expect to see too much change. The longer the window, the more change you would expect to see.
So there's just one more question. Can adaptive tests be used for school entrance exams as part of the admissions process?
We don't necessarily endorse that. However, we know some schools do it as part of a wider sort of system. Again, just thinking about my experience back in school, when I worked in a state primary, we had no sort of entrance assessment, but I know from speaking to other when in a case of oversubscription, we had to ensure that whatever one child experienced, that was kind of very reasonable and fair, and there wasn't any kind of different experience from child to child. So this can be used, a lot of schools use this for kind of what they call placement. So you can sort of, let your children have a go and see roughly where they are, and use your information to sort of develop a system of, grouping your children. But we do have other systems, and if you are interested in entrance tests specifically, we have what we call Chem Select and Chem Evaluate. So perhaps that might be more useful, but I think what I would suggest is you get in touch and you talk to one of my colleagues, and they can explain sort of the pros and cons of using the different systems.
Okay, thank you, Mark. That's it for the questions. So I think that brings us to a close today. So thank you everyone for attending and for listening and engaging. If you would like any further information, just let us know in the survey after the webinar that you fill in, or just visit the website chem.org and get in touch that way. And we look forward to speaking with you. Thanks very much.
Thanks everyone.
Have a good evening.